Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Future of Work weekly report. This is where we discuss the hottest headlines and trending topics happening in the future of work, anything from flexible, remote, hybrid, AI, or productivity. We're going to be talking about that, and today is no different. What we're going to be talking about today is an article and study produced by Crane's New York business, but it's actually from WeWork. Now, I am probably going to get a little animated here because the outlet in which this is being reported is just almost like gaslighting in a sense. And I hate to start there, but what I do want to do is be open-minded here. I've already read the article. I don't want to taint the viewers' view on this topic, but I do have to say that whenever we're looking at reports like this from WeWork, which is a flexible co-working space, right? Then we have to understand what the goal of a study like this encourages. And so I'm going to try to go through this, not unbiased, because everybody knows that I'm biased for flexible work and remote work, and they actually encourage flexible work. But some of the things that they talk about with in-office is just the opposite of what we've heard from several people who don't necessarily have a stake in the game, but these are reports that contradict what WeWork is saying. So I know that I did not do this well in setting this up, but I wanted to talk about this because it's always important to hear something. I wouldn't consider this outside of our typical approach to the future of work, but it's not necessarily highlighting remote work in a positive light. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into highlight number one, like we always do. And what they're talking about here is productivity and profitability happen at the office. So from the article that we read, it'll be in the show notes like always. They say, according to WeWork survey, the office is becoming an even greater driver of financial performance and employee productivity. So they say from the survey, 83% of business leaders say the office is more critical to profitability than 5 years ago. And then 82% of fully in-office companies report productivity gains compared to only 2/3 of remote first companies. Now that seems like it's a big difference, but they say 2/3, which is probably about 66%, and then 82%. So there is less than a 20% difference there. But as you know, if you've been watching the Future of Work weekly report, we pick from all different sources out here. We have reports from Brian Elliott, Nick Bloom, who are heavy in the work from home space or just remote work in general, or actually more so flexible work, which is what they're going to be talking about a little bit later in this article. And we also take it from different HR outlets or even reports in Singapore, like we've done in the past. And so we try not to only focus on what we believe in, right? But the thing that really stands out here is that this survey is coming from WeWork, and I don't know who they surveyed. If they surveyed people at WeWork, it's kind of convoluted and it's skewed already. Because if they're only targeting the WeWork people, think about that. What did they have in common? Oh, they use WeWork. Oh, that's an office. Oh, they like offices. They're paying for one, right? So we have to take that in consideration. But let's step back for a second. They say that in-office companies report productivity gains compared to only 2/3 of remote first companies. Well, actually, we've heard from other future of work places that we've reviewed, or articles that, and studies that we've reviewed, that there's no significant difference in profitability and productivity. So this is the part where I feel like we're being gaslit just a little bit, because they're saying, oh, hey, we have a co-working space and we're going to do a survey and we're going to say, or we're going to show this survey and say, you know what, in office is actually very important for productivity and productivity. or product profitability and productivity. But then my question becomes this, and I have my article or my article notes right here. So if I look down, that's what I'm doing. So argument number one is profitability and productivity. But the questions that weren't answered in this article is, how are we measuring productivity? Is it vibes in the office, or is it metrics, or is it a combination of both? And then if they are using metrics, what are those metrics? Because I can go in and tell you that whenever we were in the office, we didn't do a great job at measuring productivity or performance, right? It went off attendance, right? You could get fired for not coming into the office 3 days, and that was it, right? Which, hey, you got to be there to do your work. That's right. But the thing is that if you're absent or not, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, if it's a excessive absenteeism, then yeah, it's going to have an effect. But if you're absent like 1 day here, 2 days here, 3 days here, whatever, that's not actually going to be have a huge impact. And so my point is that a lot of ways that organizations used to measure productivity and performance was in the form of, hey, we have 19 team members. They're all here today. They put in 8 to 10 hours of work. Hey, it was a productive day. But then we look at the metrics and it's like, oh, actually, all 19 people were here. They were here for 8 to 10 hours. And it was one of the lowest output days that we've ever had in the company history, right? I'm just making things up. But what I'm saying is that we need to, in these articles, understand, what does productivity mean? And then how are we measuring productivity? Now, this is a survey, so I'm assuming that some responders were going off of vibes and some maybe were going off of actual numbers, right? We have a lot of tools that can promote that, right? But what I do want to call out here in Grapevine's defense, right? So while the physical office can boost productivity, distributed teams can still thrive when given the right tools and platforms for collaboration and building culture, which we're going to get to in the highlight number 2. But our virtual office bridges that gap by centralizing communication and ensuring employees, whether remote or in office, have access to vital information and can collaborate effectively without geographic limitations. And the other thing is that if you are in the office, I'm going to hold off on that one because that's going to be a little bit later in the show. So let's go ahead and go to highlight number 2, the office and company culture. So the way that they taught it or titled it was Company Culture Thrives in Person. Okay, let me just read theirs and then I'll go into my spiel. But business leaders are seeing the office as the heart of company culture. I think they even use the word nucleus, helping to foster collaboration and creativity in ways that remote setups might struggle to replicate. Let's get into the stats. 82% of leaders believe the office is more important to company culture today than it was 5 years ago. I have something to say about that. 86% predict the office will be even more important for culture in the next 5 years. So what I want to ask these people who are saying this, and again, I'm not coming at them. It's just that I've seen the data. We've read the studies. Every single week we do this. And again, we try to be unbiased with the topics that we talk about. The only thing that we're looking for is it underneath the umbrella of future of work, right? And so whenever I read those articles and they don't necessarily have a stake in CRE, corporate real estate, or in WeWork, it becomes a little bit more credible, right? So anyway, but I will play devil's advocate for myself since this is a solo episode. We have talked about Atlassian reporting and GitLab and GitHub and all that kind of stuff. So, but we haven't necessarily targeted them as a specific way of saying this is how we should do it or this is right. we typically focus on researchers who don't necessarily have a stake in the game other than this is their line of business. And it doesn't really affect them whether or not companies work from home 100% or in the office 100%, right? They're going off of the data, and it's almost like a pundit having focus groups. That's kind of what they're doing. Here, I just have some suspicions that since it is coming from WeWork, I mean, if you were WeWork and you had numbers saying that, hey, working from home is more productive, more profitable, and you have better culture, that's not going to be good for their business model. So that's basically what I'm trying to get at here. But let's go back to key insight key insight. Business leaders are seeing the office as the heart of the company culture. Okay, my question, again, looking at my notes right here. Okay, why wasn't culture as important 5 years ago? And what has changed today to make culture more important, right? And what in the future is going to change? Is it that employees aren't in your face 8 hours a day and you can't take the time to control them, and they have more autonomy, they have more power, they have more choice, flexibility? Or is it that you didn't necessarily care about culture until it became an actual business problem? And what I mean by that is we did an article, or we did an episode on Amazon's 5 days back into the office for their corporate employees. And now we're seeing 73% are willing to, or are looking for other positions. And, or I think 90 something percent are disappointed with the decision. And so now we're seeing an exodus, or we're about to see an exodus of Amazon people leaving. And so is that why culture is more important? Because now it's at the forefront of your revenue model in a sense. Because if you continue to have attrition rise, well, guess what? You're hiring, you're recruiting, you're hiring, you're onboarding, you're training, all that goes up, right? And so I'm just wondering, why is culture now important? It should have been important there. And so then it goes to my next call out here is, so what do companies plan to do to ensure culture remains at the forefront in the office, right? Because my experience in the office was the culture was something that happened. Now, there were a couple others where we had like happy hours and people talk about pizza parties and all that kind of stuff. I mean, okay, yeah, we can hate on that all that we want to. There is some truth to that where, yes, you're hanging out, you're not necessarily doing the work, or you are doing the work, but it's in a little bit more of a chill manner where you can actually communicate to one another and understand who people are just a little bit more. But in the majority of the organization, you did a lot on the recruiting side to make somebody interested in joining the company. Then you did a lot on the onboarding and training side in a good company. And then after that, it was kind of like, you know what? We've got them. We locked and hooked them. All right, let's send them off to the races. And if they don't perform, well, it doesn't matter if they're good for the culture because they're not good for the bottom line, right? So this is what I'm talking about whenever we talk about in office. If you're talking about that the office is where culture thrives, then what are you going to do different? Because before, in the majority of organizations, it wasn't necessarily the case, right? So that's my point there. And then it always goes back to this question. What are they defining culture as, right? Because we hear a lot of people talk about, we need to be in the office because the water cooler spontaneity, right? That's where ideas are formulated. I'm going to quote Amina from Amina Moreau, CEO, co-founder of Radius, a co-working space, flexible co-working space. And she always says, I don't want to take a chance that by happenstance, culture happens in my company, right? And I think that's what leaders are suggesting here. Again, this is a survey, so this is how people are thinking and feeling, right? It's we're assuming. Let me say that. Allegedly. So we have to think about that. What is the metrics of culture that they're measuring? What are they going to do different that they didn't do before the pandemic? And why has it all of a sudden changed? Right? And just to go on Grapevine here, because I do want to start talking a little bit more about Grapevine in these, because what we're actually doing, as I mentioned earlier, Grapevine is bridging the gap. So whether you're in office, remote, or in a flexible model, you still need that centralized platform where everybody in the organization, whether they're working over here in India, here in the US, Canada, Mexico, Europe, it doesn't matter, Ukraine, it doesn't matter, right? Because you have that centralized platform that keeps everybody on the same page. And that's what we're building. And that's why it's so important. And that's why it's the office of the future, because the office of the future is not going to be a physical location, because it just doesn't work that way. We're hyper distributed as employees. And I'm going to touch on this whenever we get to flexible workspaces on the rise. But basically, I'm saying that culture can be built with intention, whether you're in the office or remote or a mixture of both. But at the same time, right now, we are seeing more people take on the hybrid and flexible approach. And so not everybody all the time is going to be in the office at the same time. And so what you need is an office that is consistently owned and that matches people's time of working, whether they're in different time zones or whatever the case is. And that's where Grapevine comes in. We are that centralized platform, that virtual office platform that allows you to keep everybody up to date. And not only that, we're software agnostic, so we allow you to bring all that stuff into one system. And if you bring that into your operating approach of a flexible organization, then it makes it so much easier to be able to keep everybody in line and not in line, aligned. And it just, it's an intentional approach to building culture, to keeping people informed and engaged, right? And it allows the employee to continue to have the autonomy and flexibility that they have now. And the studies that I read, other than this one, this is the outlier, I see that flexible work is the best option because it gives people a choice. But at the same time, then we're going to create hubs of different people, which takes me into highlight number 3. So they call this, the title is Demand for Flexible Office Spaces is Rising. We call it the rise of flexible space offices. So flexible workspaces are on the rise, with nearly 2/3 of businesses planning to invest in co-working spaces, including fully remote companies that are starting to shift back towards physical offices. Even that wording right there is a little bit off, because there's a difference between a fully remote company maybe having a co-working space or even getting an office, and it might just be a strategic approach to have a place that everybody can go to whenever they do have their own sites, right? I call off-sites own sites now. And so the shift back towards physical spaces, that's not actually the case. It's that and again, this might sound contradictory, but in the Atlassian study, whenever they saw that teammates could come together once, twice, 3 times a year, the times that they come together, that connection lasts about, I think it's anywhere from 6 to 9 months or 9 to 12 months after that. So what they might be doing is renting or choosing a co-working space for that event, or maybe periodically, like quarterly, and then that's where they're going. They're not necessarily shifting back to a physical space. So let's just be careful with that. The stats in this section, 64% of businesses follow a hybrid schedule. 95% of remote companies plan to invest in flexible office space within the next 2 years. Now, this actually, I made a prediction that the future of work is going to be where they have that platform. So that's going to hopefully be Grapevine's virtual office platform, that's going to be the nucleus. That's going to be where everybody in the organization, no matter where they live, no matter where, if they go in the office, no matter where they work, they're going to be able to stay connected, aligned, and engaged. And then we did mention that there was going to be flexible or on-demand co-working spaces that were going to pick up, right? And then at the moment, I can't remember what the third one was, but that's we are kind of predicting that as well. So we don't necessarily see this as too outlandish, but to say that they're shifting back to the physical space is a stretch. Now, from the article, the notes that I specifically took down is that, so they say in the article, there's one line that I wanted to call out. So it says Santora, which I think is one of the WeWork executives, maybe even the CEO, emphasized that the increased demand for these workspaces reflects the end of remote work and a new era of the office. And this is a quote from him. So he says, this new data underscores a significant shift in recent years where fully remote work is losing steam as businesses acknowledge the irreplaceable value of the office. So the reason that I wanted to call this out is because that is not true. That's just not true, right? Like, okay, what a lot of people talk about is that remote work saw a significant increase during the pandemic. Obviously, we had to do that. So we saw about 41% of all businesses and US employees working remotely, right? And then we saw it drop down, but it was still higher than pandemic or pre-pandemic levels. So about, I think the last article that I saw from Brian Elliott was about 35%, right? And then we hear from Nick Bloom that says 2024 is going to be the steadiness of remote work and flexible work, right? And so we're not seeing the reduction of remote work. We're seeing the steadiness, and then the flexibility and hybrid approaches are rising, right? So what I want to clarify here, and this is another one of my notes, is that one, remote work isn't going away. Like, let's just stop pretending. And then two is that remote work does not mean work from home. And so I want to put this into an example, right? Whenever WeWork says that we have, or we're seeing that even 100% remote first companies are thinking about physical spaces, it doesn't mean that there's a reduction in remote work. And let's put this together for a second. So whenever I say that, if let's say that we're a company, okay, let's just use Grapevine, for example. Okay, so I'm the founder. I'm here in North Carolina. My founding advisor is in Canada, and then a majority of our team is in Pakistan, and then some are in the UK, right? And so if we chose to have physical spaces through a flexible workspace or whatever the case is, guess what? We're not all in the office together. We might be all in the office, but we're still remote from one another. And so instead, and this is what I talk about here, is like, instead of having remote work less prevalent, it's actually going to be still prevalent. It's just we're going to be in different hubs and we're going to be working remotely from an office. So it doesn't really make sense to take that approach right now. It does make sense to have on-demand flexible workspaces or even a WeWork in the places that a majority of your employees are, right? So for me, it might make sense for us to purchase a WeWork office or some version of it in Pakistan and be able to have them work from that office, right? And then for me, I'm going to stay working remotely because I'm the only one here in North Carolina at the moment, right? Now, if we end up getting 10 employees in North Carolina and we're close enough, I'm like, let's say Charlotte, then maybe it would make sense to every once in a while purchase an on-demand flexible spot for the day just to engage with each other, or give an allowance, a monthly allowance or stipend where people can go into a WeWork because we have a monthly subscription or something like that. And boom, there we go. But all that's really doing is giving us flexibility, right? So if that person wants to work in the office, go. If they don't. If they want to work from a coffee shop, boom, drive to the coffee shop. See, it's these things that just don't add up to me in some of these things. And I know I'm being harsh. I warned you at the beginning. But another thing that I want to call out here on this last part, and then we'll wrap it up, because it just made me feel like this was really gaslighting. So Santora again explains flexible workspaces are best positioned to provide adaptable solutions that meet their priorities, maximizing space utilization, enhancing productivity, and encouraging employee engagement. Again, yes, I agree. The flexible workspaces are going to increase. They're only going to be continuing to grow, right? Because there's certain people that like to work in the office. There's other people that have a better output in the remote work space. And then other people want a combination of both. And then companies are going to have on sites, because we still want to get people in person. It just doesn't have to be 5 days a week, right? It could be quarterly, it could be monthly, whatever your company is able to do, it could do that. It could be certain departments going out at certain times, and then the entire company, if it's not too large, right? Which actually is another point. If it's a large company, it doesn't matter if you have everybody working in the office. And I mentioned this whenever we talked about Amazon's RTO. It doesn't matter if they're in the office; they're still working remote from a majority of their peers. So anyway, I digress. Let's go back to this quote. So maximizing space utilization. Yes, okay, that makes sense. But enhancing productivity and encouraging employee engagement. You can hear me trying to talk as I'm thinking. It just doesn't add up to me. We had over a century to get the traditional office right. And whenever the pandemic happened and people started to experience the autonomy that flexible work gave them, or remote work gave them, they started saying, you know what? This is a better way. And if I go into the office, they don't care about me. So my point in this entire article is that you say these things are going to happen, and you say that these are the reports from the survey, and I can't argue with that. That's what it is, right? But my point is, one, why wasn't culture as important as it was 5 years ago as it is today? Something has shifted. What was that shifted? Employees started gaining power. And that means that executives have to start listening to their employees a little bit more. And I think that's a good thing. And then the other part here is enhancing productivity and encouraging employee engagement. How are you going to do that when people are in the office versus when they're remote? Is it only that you care about employee engagement if they're in the office? Why can't you do that now, right? Or why can't you do that remotely? The answer is you can. And again, that's where Grapevine can come in. There's other tools out there. Don't just focus on Grapevine. But this is the part that I feel like is gaslighting. We have this article from Crane's New York Business, and there's an entire section on real estate that goes into commercial real estate, residential real estate, deals of the day, who owns the block, all that kind of stuff, right? And then we have people, this report is talking about WeWork, which is a co-working space. And we're also talking to the CEO of WeWork, who has been in the CRE space for, I can't remember the exact, but over 20 years, I believe was what it said. And so all of those coincidences maybe just don't add up to an accredited source or a credible source to say that this is actually how we're moving forward, or that productivity and profitability happen in the office when we see in other studies, not just one study, but several studies, that productivity and profitability have no significant impact, whether you're working in the office, hybrid, or remote. Same thing with company culture, right? Just being in the office does not mean that your company culture is going to rise automatically. So, all right, I'm going to take a deep breath. That is the Future of Work Weekly Report. I hope that you enjoyed this. Hopefully I wasn't too passionate on this topic, but I'm just a true believer that if we can find better ways to work, then we will have better outcomes as a company, as a team, and for our customers, for our product, and so on and so forth. The benefits continue. And actually, I do want to say this. One of the things that we're not actually thinking about, or a lot of these people aren't necessarily thinking about, is if we mandate the office again, who is affected? And I've talked about this several times, but who is affected? And you have to think about that as well. So I won't even go into it because it's already a long episode. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you on the next Future of Work Weekly Report. But don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and share with any other Future of Workers out there. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next Future of Work Weekly Report.